Hello, travelers. I am the sleeping Lorekeeper. Today, we venture into the dark heart of Warhammer 40K, into a world where desire transcends reason, where perfection becomes a curse, and where the pursuit of beauty leads to the deepest fall. Today, we speak of Slaanesh, the Dark Prince, the deity of excess and sensation. But we won't walk the path of horror. We'll walk the path of one artist who sought only beauty and found so much more. His name was Kaelen Voss, a painter on the civilized world of Tertia Magnifica, a planet renowned across the sector for its arts and culture. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't an inquisitor. He was simply a man who had spent his entire life seeking perfection in every brushstroke. Kaelen grew up in an artist colony on the upper levels of the hive. Not in the luxury of nobility, but not in the squalor of the lower depths either. He was part of the middle stratum, those who had just enough room to breathe, to dream, to create. From childhood, he drew. He started with charcoal on scrap paper, progressed to paints, and eventually to the finest oils imported from off-world. His talent was undeniable. By age 20, his works hung in the halls of minor nobles. By 30, he had painted commissions for planetary governors. But success brought something unexpected. Not satisfaction, but emptiness. Get comfortable, close your eyes, and drift with me into the dream world of old. Kaelen would stand in his studio for hours, brush in hand, staring at blank canvas. The Emperor's light filtered through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. Beautiful, perhaps, but not enough. Never enough. "What am I missing?" he would whisper to the empty room. The answer, when it came, was not what he expected. It began with a commission. A wealthy merchant named Valdus Thex wanted a portrait, nothing unusual. But Thex had recently returned from the Eastern Fringe, and he brought with him a collection of Xenos artifacts that he claimed were purely for academic study. Among these artifacts was a mirror, not large, perhaps 2 feet tall, framed in metal that seemed to shift between silver and gold depending on the angle of light. Thex insisted it be included in the portrait's background. "It's from the Eldar," Thex explained, his voice carrying a strange enthusiasm. "Recovered from a craft world debris field. Perfectly legal salvage, I assure you. But look at the craftsmanship. Have you ever seen metalwork so exquisite?" Kaelen looked, and in that moment something changed. The mirror's surface didn't reflect the room as it was. Instead, it showed possibilities. Colors more vivid than reality. Shadows that seemed to breathe. His own reflection looked back at him, but more alive, more vibrant, as if the man in the mirror was truly living, while Kaelen merely existed. "Remarkable," Kaelen breathed. That night, he dreamed. In the dream, he stood in a gallery unlike any he had ever seen. The walls stretched infinitely in all directions, covered with paintings that moved and breathed. Each canvas showed scenes of impossible beauty, colors that shouldn't exist, forms that defied geometry, yet felt more real than anything in the waking world. A voice spoke, soft as silk, warm as summer wine. You feel it, don't you, Kaelen? The emptiness, the hunger for something more than this gray existence. He turned, but saw no one. Only the paintings, writhing with life. "Who are you?" he asked, laughter like bells and broken glass. "I am the answer you've been seeking. I am perfection itself. I am the sensation you've been denied all your life. What do you want from me?" "Want? Oh, my dear artist, I want nothing. I only offer. The question is, what do you want?" Kaelen woke with tears on his face, though he couldn't say if they were from sorrow or joy. The next morning, everything had changed. The studio that had felt like a prison now seemed full of potential. Light fell differently. Colors called to him with voices he could almost hear. For the first time in years, Kaelen felt alive. He began Valdis Thex's portrait with a fervor that surprised even himself. But something was different. His hand moved with a fluidity it had never possessed. The colors he mixed seemed more vivid, more perfect than any he had created before. And the mirror whispered. Not in words exactly, more like suggestions at the edge of consciousness. Try this shade. Blend these tones. See how the light plays here? The portrait progressed rapidly. Thex was delighted when he saw the preliminary work. "By the Emperor Voss, this is extraordinary. You've captured something I didn't even know was there." But Kaelen barely heard him. He was already thinking about the next painting, and the next. The hunger that had been empty void was now being filled, but each filling created new hunger, deeper and more demanding. He began to paint through the nights. Sleep felt like wasted time. Food was an interruption. The only thing that mattered was the canvas, the colors, the pursuit of that perfect image that danced just beyond his reach. His fellow artists noticed the change. Some were impressed by his renewed vigor and the obvious improvement in his technique. Others were concerned. "You look unwell, Kaelen," his friend Mira told him one evening. "When was the last time you slept properly?" "Sleep?" He laughed, and the sound had a quality that made her step back. "Why would I sleep when I'm finally seeing clearly for the first time in my life?" She looked at his latest work, a landscape of rolling hills beneath an impossible sky. The colors shifted subtly as she watched, making her feel dizzy and strangely warm. "It's beautiful," she said carefully. "But Kaelen, there's something about it that feels wrong. Like it's too beautiful, if that makes sense." He smiled. Finally, someone understands. "Yes, Mira. Too beautiful for this drab world. That's exactly right." She left troubled and never returned to his studio. Weeks passed, then months. Kaelen's reputation grew to unprecedented heights. Nobles competed for his commissions. His paintings sold for fortunes. Gallery owners begged for exhibitions. But those who spent too long studying his works reported strange experiences. Vivid dreams, heightened sensations, an inability to find satisfaction in ordinary pleasures anymore, as if Kaelen's art had awakened hungers they never knew existed. The ecclesiarchy began to take notice. Kaelen, meanwhile, had progressed beyond mere painting. He had begun to experiment with the mirror itself, using it not just as inspiration, but as a tool. He would paint while gazing into its depths, letting its impossible reflections guide his hand. The works he created during these sessions were different. They seemed to pulse with their own life. Colors that viewers swore changed when they looked away and back again. Figures that appeared to move at the edge of peripheral vision. One night, deep in his creative fervor, Kaelen cut his hand on a palette knife. Blood dripped onto the canvas he was working on. A portrait of a woman whose features seemed to shift between sublime beauty and something almost predatory. The blood soaked into the paint, and the painting smiled. Finally, the voice from his dreams spoke, this time in the waking world. You begin to understand. Art is not observation, Kaelen. It is transformation. You don't capture beauty. You create it. You reshape reality itself through will and desire. Kaelen stared at his bleeding hand, then at the painting that now seemed more alive than he felt. "What are you?" he whispered. "I am Slaanesh," the voice replied, and the name resonated through his bones like a bell. "I am the Prince of Pleasure, the Lord of Excess, she who thirsts. I am everything you've been seeking, and you, dear Kaelen, are becoming my instrument." I never asked for this. Laughter. Beautiful and terrible. Oh, but you did. Every time you felt that emptiness, every time you yearned for more, every time you looked at the world and found it wanting, you called to me, whether you knew it or not. Kaelen should have been terrified, should have called for a priest, should have destroyed the mirror and burned his recent works, should have fled to the nearest chapel and begged for the Emperor's protection. But the truth was simpler and more damning. He didn't want to stop. The Tertia Magnifica annual art exhibition was the social event of the year. Artists from across the Hive, and even from other worlds, displayed their finest works. This year, Kaelen Voss had been given the honor of the Central Gallery, the largest space reserved for the most prestigious artist. He arrived on the opening night to find crowds already gathering. Nobles in their finest garments. Art collectors with purses heavy with coin. Critics ready to praise or condemn. And somewhere in the crowd, he knew, ecclesiarchy observers who had heard troubling rumors. The gallery director, an elderly woman named Serena, greeted him nervously. "Master Voss, your pieces have been arranged as you specified. But I must tell you, some of my staff refused to work in your gallery. They said the paintings made them uncomfortable." Kaelen smiled. Art should make us uncomfortable, Serena. That's how we know it's working. The exhibition opened, the crowd filtered in, and the gallery fell silent. Kaelen had created 15 new works specifically for this exhibition. Each one was a masterpiece of technique. But more than that, each one was a doorway, a crack in reality through which something vast and beautiful and terrible could peer through. There was the Feast Eternal, a banquet table laden with foods so exquisitely rendered that viewers claimed they could taste them. But the longer they looked, the more they noticed details that shouldn't be there. Fruits that glistened with something that wasn't quite juice. Meats that seemed to pulse. And the figures seated at the table, their faces caught between ecstasy and something darker. There was the dance. Figures moving in patterns that seemed to follow music only they could hear. Viewers found themselves swaying unconsciously, their bodies responding to rhythms that existed only in the paint. And at the center, dominating the entire gallery, was his final piece. He had simply titled it Awakening. It showed a figure, gender ambiguous, achingly beautiful, emerging from a mirror. One hand remained in the reflective surface, while the other reached out toward the viewer. The figure's expression promised everything anyone had ever desired, while its eyes held depths that suggested the price of such promises. The crowd's reaction was immediate and divided. Some wept openly, overcome by the beauty they witnessed. Others stood transfixed, unable to look away, their eyes glazing over as they lost themselves in the painting's depths. A few fled immediately, instinct warning them of danger, even if they couldn't name it. And then, someone screamed. A young nobleman, staring at the Feast Eternal, had begun clawing at his own throat. "I can taste it!" he shrieked. "The fruit! I can taste it! It's inside me! It's changing me!" Guards rushed forward, but the contagion of sensation was spreading. A woman viewing the dance had begun moving in jerking, unnatural motions, her face twisted in a rictus of pleasure and pain. An elderly collector stood before Awakening, whispering to the figure in the painting as if it could hear him. And perhaps it could, for the painted hand seemed to extend further from the canvas. Reaching. Always reaching. Kaelen watched it all with a sense of profound satisfaction. This was his true masterpiece. Not the paintings themselves, but what they awakened in those who viewed them. The recognition that the drab reality they inhabited was only a shadow of the sensations that could exist. The ecclesiarchy observers were already calling for reinforcements. The gallery was evacuated. The paintings were to be confiscated and destroyed. But Kaelen was no longer there. He had slipped away in the chaos, the mirror from Valdis Thex's collection tucked under his arm. He knew where he needed to go now. The paintings were just the beginning. The real art was yet to be created. They found him 3 days later in his studio, surrounded by dozens of canvases. But these weren't paintings in any traditional sense. They were windows, tears in reality, through which something immense and hungry was reaching through. The arbitrator squad that breached the door stopped in their tracks. The studio had been transformed into something that hurt to look at directly. colors that shouldn't exist, geometries that made the eyes water. And at the center, Kaelen himself, still painting, his hands moving with inhuman speed. "Kaelen Voss," the squad leader announced, his voice artificially steady. "By the authority of the Adeptus Arbites and the Holy Ordos, you are under arrest for heresy and corruption. Surrender immediately." Kaelen turned. His appearance had changed. His features had become sharper, more defined, achingly perfect in their symmetry. His eyes held colors that shifted like oil on water. When he smiled, it was beautiful and horrible in equal measure. "Arrest?" he said, and his voice carried harmonics that made the arbitrators step back involuntarily. "For what? For showing people beauty? For awakening them to sensations they never knew existed?" "For corruption," the squad leader said, raising his shotgun. "For trafficking with the ruinous powers. For damning souls in the name of your art." Kaelen laughed, the sound like breaking crystal. "Corruption? Is that what you call it when someone removes the blindfold you've worn all your life? Is it damnation to show humanity what it could truly feel, truly experience, if it only had the courage to reach for it?" He turned back to his canvas. "I'm not finished yet. This one will be my true masterpiece. Through this, I'll show everyone. The entire hive, the entire world. They'll see what I've seen, feel what I've felt, and they'll understand." The arbitrators opened fire, but Kaelen had already stepped through the canvas, disappearing into the impossible space beyond. The studio erupted in flames as the arbitrators' incendiary rounds found their marks, consuming the paintings and the corruption they represented. Yet in the instant before the fire took everything, those present swore they heard laughter. Not Kaelen's, but something vaster, more ancient, infinitely more patient. And they saw for just a moment a reflection in the flames of a figure so beautiful it burned to look upon, raising one hand in a gesture that might have been blessing or curse. The Inquisition came. They purged Kaelen's studio. They hunted down and destroyed every painting he had ever created. They interrogated everyone who had attended the exhibition, and many were found wanting, their minds already too corrupted by what they had witnessed. Valdis Thex and his entire household were executed. The Xenos mirror was destroyed with plasma fire, though those who performed the task reported that even in its molten remains, reflections seemed to move with independent life. The artist colony where Kaelen had lived was razed to the ground. Every surface he might have touched was scoured. Every record of his existence was expunged from official archives. But art has a way of enduring. Years later, in galleries across a dozen worlds, artists began reporting strange dreams, visions of colors that shouldn't exist, a voice that whispered of beauty beyond imagination. And sometimes, in their most inspired moments, they would feel as if someone was standing just behind them, guiding their hand, showing them wonders that would cost them everything. The ecclesiarchy maintains that Kaelen Voss was simply a heretic who fell to chaos. They say his art held no true power, that the incidents at the exhibition were mass hysteria, that his fate was nothing more than the deserved end of a traitor to humanity. But those who truly understand art, who have felt that hunger for something more, who have glimpsed the edge of beauty that transcends the material, they know differently. They know that somewhere, in the space between reality and dream, Kaelen Voss still paints. And his art continues to call out to those who have eyes to see it, ears to hear it, souls hungry enough to reach for it. This is the seduction of Slaanesh. Not force, but invitation. Not chains, but the promise of freedom from limitation. The Dark Prince doesn't drag souls into damnation. He shows them a door and lets them walk through willingly, step by step, choice by choice, until there's no path back. Kaelen Voss sought only to create beauty, to transcend the ordinary, and touch something extraordinary. And he succeeded. The question that haunts those who know his story is simple. Was what he found worth what he became? Thank you for listening to another tale from Sleeping Lorekeeper. Remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, the most dangerous corruptions are not those forced upon us, but those we invite in ourselves, one small compromise at a time. Until next time, sleep well and dream carefully. If you're still awake, traveler, maybe stay for another story and hit the like button. But if sleep has already found you, rest easy. Let the stars keep their quiet watch, and dream well.